It started with a scream no one recorded. In the women's unit of Rikers Island, silence was the only thing that kept you safe. Guards called it discipline. The women called it survival. On a gray December morning in 2018, a strange stillness settled over the Rose M. Singer Center, the section of Rikers known as Rosie's. The air smelled of bleach and metal. The fluorescent lights flickered like tired eyes. Inside the dorms, women stood at their cell doors, listening, because something was different that day. An unmarked car had crossed the bridge before sunrise. Inside it sat Detective Lila Anderson, a state investigator known for walking into places other people avoided. She'd been sent after an anonymous letter reached the Department of Investigation. It claimed that inside Rosie's, inmates weren't just being silenced, they were being erased. Anderson's badge carried authority, but not protection. Everyone at Rikers knew that the women's unit was a world of its own, run by unwritten rules, guarded by men who believed those walls could keep anything secret. As Anderson stepped through the metal detectors, she caught her reflection in the reinforced glass, a calm face, steady eyes, and behind them, a feeling she couldn't name yet, the sense that this investigation would cost her something. When the first cell door clanged open, she understood why. In the winter of 2018, a quiet storm was brewing inside Rikers Island, not in the men's block that headlines always mentioned, but in the forgotten corner known as Rosie's, the women's unit. Officially called the Rose M. Singer Center, it was supposed to be a place of rehabilitation. In reality, it was a place where silence had become survival. The day it all began, the air in the unit felt heavier than usual. Guards whispered near the gates, nurses moved faster, and the usual noise of shouting and metal clanks was replaced by something worse, a kind of waiting silence. Word had spread that an internal affairs investigator had arrived unannounced. Inmates called her the Ice Woman, not because she was cold, but because she looked unshakable. Her real name was Detective Lila Anderson, and she had a reputation for digging until someone broke. She'd been sent to Rikers after an anonymous tip claimed a systemic abuse ring had been running inside the women's facility for years, a network of guards using their authority for control, intimidation, and silence. At first, no one would talk. Fear was currency here. But Anderson knew something was wrong from the moment she stepped inside. The fluorescent lights hummed above her as she walked past rows of cells. The smell of bleach and sweat lingered in the air. Women leaned against their doors, watching her with eyes that had seen too much and said nothing. One inmate in particular caught her attention, a quiet woman named Danielle Danny Moore, age 29, serving time for a nonviolent fraud charge. Her file said model inmate. No infractions. No complaints. But when Anderson looked at her, she saw something else, a flicker of fear that had learned how to hide itself. That evening, Anderson asked to speak with her privately. Danny hesitated, then nodded. They met in a small room used for legal consultations. The door closed, the cameras blinked red, and for the first time, Danny spoke in a whisper. "They think no one sees," she said. "But the cameras in the East Corridor, they never work after lights out. They don't want them to." Anderson leaned forward. "Who's they?" Danny's hands trembled on the table. "The ones who come in at night. They say it's for checks. They make us sign papers that say nothing happened. If you say no, you get transferred." Her voice cracked. "And not to another dorm. You disappear." Anderson froze. Transfers were routine, but too many transfers without records? That was different. She'd read about similar patterns in reports from other facilities, but Rikers had a way of swallowing evidence whole. When she left the interview room that night, her stomach churned. She knew what this meant, a potential scandal inside the nation's most notorious jail, targeting women no one listened to. By morning, her access badge stopped working at the East Corridor. The warden told her it was restricted during cleaning. But Anderson had been around long enough to recognize the tone, the kind of authority that covered more than dirt. Meanwhile, inside the dorm, tension was building. The women could feel something changing, eyes on them, conversations that stopped when they entered a room, guards who suddenly grew colder. One of them, a young mother named Tasha Green, whispered to Danny one night, "They know you talked." "How?" Danny asked. "Because nothing stays quiet in here. Not even the walls." Over the next few days, strange things started happening. The light above Danny's bunk flickered constantly. Her commissary credits disappeared. Her mail stopped arriving. Then, one evening, the nurse failed to show up for medication rounds in her dorm. Hours later, a guard came instead. The same one who'd been assigned to the East Corridor, Officer Bennett. He smiled too easily, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You shouldn't have said anything, Danny. You're making things harder for everyone." And just like that, the fear returned, not just for her, but for everyone in the dorm who'd seen her talking to Anderson. That night, the women couldn't sleep. They could hear footsteps in the hall long after lockdown. At one point, the sound of keys echoed near the end of the corridor, followed by the quiet creak of a door that was supposed to stay locked. Then, silence. The next morning, Danny was gone. The officers said she'd been transferred to Bellevue for evaluation. But when Tasha asked about her friends' belongings, they were gone too. Her bunk was stripped, her name tag removed. Detective Anderson demanded to see the transfer report. The clerk looked confused. "There's no transfer under that name," he said. By the end of that week, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Danny had escaped. Others said she'd been taken to solitary. A few whispered she'd been moved off the island entirely. Anderson stayed late that Friday night, reviewing security logs. Most of the footage was missing. The East Corridor, the one Danny had mentioned, had no recordings after midnight. But when she fast-forwarded through the tape from a nearby camera, she caught a reflection in a window. It was faint, blurry, but it showed three figures escorting someone down the hall wrapped in a blanket. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. Anderson printed the frame, locked it in her bag, and left the building. She didn't realize someone was watching her, a guard leaning against the outer gate, smoking, eyes following her until she drove away. That weekend, the warden called an emergency staff meeting. "The department is investigating recent false allegations made by an outside agent," he announced. "We maintain that the facility operates under the highest ethical standards." But everyone in the room knew the truth: this was damage control. And in Rikers, damage control always meant one thing: someone was about to disappear again. The following Monday, Anderson arrived at work to find her ID photo replaced with a red notice: "Access revoked, pending review." She was told to leave the premises immediately. On her way out, she passed a group of inmates lined up for movement. One of them, a frail woman with gray hair, whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "They think we're weak because we're women. But this place has ghosts, and they never stay quiet forever." Anderson froze. Her pulse quickened. Because she realized something chilling: someone had slipped a small folded note into her jacket pocket. She opened it in her car. It was written in trembling handwriting. "If you want proof, check under cell 213. She left something behind." And just like that, everything changed. Because whatever was under that cell, whatever Danny Moore had hidden before she vanished, was going to expose what Rikers Island had been hiding for years. But when Anderson returned to the unit the next night, the hallway was sealed off, and a team of uniformed men were already there, moving boxes out of the East Corridor. She watched from her car, heart pounding, as a single crate marked "Evidence Transfer, Confidential" was loaded into a van and driven away. The next day, the van was reported missing. And from that moment on, nothing on Rikers Island was ever the same. Because when the truth started to leak, so did the fear. And before the week was over, one more woman would vanish, this time, not an inmate. When they opened the warden's office the next morning, nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. The morning after the warden's office door was forced open, Rikers Island came to a standstill. Correctional officers whispered in corners, the phones in administration rang endlessly, and no one gave straight answers. Word spread fast, something had happened to Warden Pierce, and whatever it was, the department was keeping it quiet. Detective Lila Anderson found out the same way everyone else did, through rumor. Her suspension notice had been sent only a day earlier, but she still had contacts inside the walls. One of them, a nurse named Valerie, called her from a burner phone that morning. Her voice was shaking. "They're saying the warden's gone. Not fired, gone. His office is sealed. They took the hard drives, his laptop, everything." Anderson stared at her dashboard from her parked car across the East River, the prison faintly visible through the gray mist. "Val, what do you mean gone?" "His car's still there. No one saw him leave. But his office window was broken from the inside." That detail hit her like a hammer. From the inside. Anderson gripped the steering wheel, her mind racing. First Danny Moore, now the warden. And somewhere in between, a van full of evidence had disappeared off the map. She opened her notebook. Inside was the single image she'd printed before losing access, 3 shadowy figures escorting someone wrapped in a blanket. Beneath it, she'd written the name Danny Moore and the timestamp, 2:47 a.m. The city was starting to take notice too. Reporters outside Rikers demanded answers, but the Department of Correction gave a single statement: Warden Pierce is on medical leave. No explanation. No follow-up. Just silence. But silence was never empty at Rikers, it always hid something. Inside the Rose M. Singer Center, the atmosphere had changed overnight. The women were restless, tense, their movements watched more closely than ever. Guards now moved in pairs, and the East Corridor, once off-limits, was now completely shut down. Sheets hung across the entrance like a curtain over a crime scene. Tasha Green hadn't slept properly since Danny vanished. She kept the folded note Danny had once written to her tucked in her sock, as if holding it would protect her. She didn't talk to anyone anymore. But that morning, when she saw a new officer walk through the door, she froze. He wasn't in uniform, not a Rikers officer, anyway. His badge read Special Inspector, Department Oversight Division. His name was Ryan Colton, and he claimed he was there to assist with the warden's transition. But that wasn't why he was really there. Anderson didn't know it yet, but Colton's real job was to make sure her investigation never saw daylight. Meanwhile, Anderson had started her own off-the-books investigation. With her clearance revoked, she worked from home, surrounded by folders and photocopies. She'd learned the rhythm of Rikers over the years, how information moved, who could be bribed, who could be threatened, and who would talk if they were scared enough. She found one of the transport drivers listed on the original evidence van manifest, a man named Luis Vega, who'd abruptly quit his job the day after the van went missing. She tracked him to a small auto shop in Queens. He denied everything at first. "I don't know what you're talking about. That wasn't my route." But when Anderson showed him the photo from the security reflection, his face turned pale. "That's not supposed to exist," he muttered. "Then tell me what did." Vega swallowed hard. "They told us we were moving biohazard material, medical waste. But when we got to the docks, they took the crate off the truck and said our part was done. 2 unmarked SUVs were waiting. The men weren't DOC. They were wearing city badges, but they weren't correctional. Where did they take it?" He hesitated. "They said the old hospital wing, Building K. But that place has been closed for years." Anderson leaned back, her pulse quickening. She'd walked through Building K once, an abandoned structure on the far edge of Rikers, where the city used to house tuberculosis patients. It had been condemned years ago. But now, it was back in use. Inside Rikers, Tasha noticed more officers stationed near the outer dorms. The women weren't being allowed outside for recreation anymore. Meals arrived late, cold, and in silence. The whispers grew darker. Someone said they'd seen body bags loaded into laundry trucks. Someone else said a nurse had disappeared too. That nurse was Valerie. When Anderson called her that night, the line rang 6 times before someone finally picked up. But the voice that answered wasn't Valerie's. "Detective Anderson," the man said calmly. "You've been making a lot of noise about a place that thrives on quiet." Anderson froze. "Who is this?" "Someone who wants you to stop before you end up like them." The line went dead. She felt the weight of every silence that followed. The next day, Anderson drove to Rikers anyway. She parked near the service road where Vega had said the van entered. From behind the chain-link fence, she could see the outline of Building K through the fog, its windows blacked out, its roof collapsing in places. But something caught her eye, faint yellow light glowing behind one of the boarded-up windows. She raised her camera and zoomed in. There it was, movement. A silhouette. Someone walking past the light. Then, for a split second, another figure appeared beside it, smaller, slower, and wearing what looked like a prison uniform. She pressed the shutter. The image blurred as a gust of wind rattled the fence. When she looked up again, the light was gone. Anderson backed away, heart racing. But she wasn't alone. A black SUV idled at the corner of the service road. She could feel its headlights on her even after she turned the ignition and drove off the island. That night, she couldn't sleep. She pinned everything she knew on her wall: names, times, building blueprints. At the center, she circled one word in red ink: Rosie's. Then, she remembered the note. "Check under cell 213. She knew she couldn't get back inside, but she also knew someone who could. She called an old friend, Officer Janine Lowe, one of the few women still working in the Singer Center who hadn't been corrupted by fear. Janine owed her a favor. At 2 a.m., her phone buzzed with a photo message. It was dark, grainy, but clear enough to make out. A hollow space beneath a concrete bunk. Inside it, a small object wrapped in fabric. And in the next message, it's a journal. Belongs to someone named DM. Danny Moore. Anderson's hands trembled as she read the scanned pages Janine sent over the next few hours. Each entry was a record of what had happened in the East Corridor: times, dates, names. Not just guards. Inspectors. Even administrators. Danny had been documenting everything. But the final page stopped mid-sentence. "If anything happens to me, tell them, Ben nothing." The ink bled, as if the page had been wet, maybe tears, maybe something else. Anderson sat in silence, reading the last half-written line again and again. Danny had known she wouldn't make it out. The next morning, Officer Janine Lowe didn't report for her shift. Her locker was empty. Her car was found 2 blocks from the Queensbridge entrance, keys still inside. And just like that, another woman was gone. Anderson's investigation was no longer about uncovering a cover-up. It was about survival. Because whatever she'd just uncovered, whatever Danny had died trying to reveal, was bigger than Rikers Island. It was about power. And power, inside those walls, never played fair. By the time Anderson realized she was being followed, it was too late. Her phone was tapped. Her mail tampered with. And every attempt to contact the press ended with automated rejections. Someone wanted this story buried deep. But there was one thing they hadn't counted on. Someone else had already made a copy of Danny's journal. Someone still inside Rikers. And that person was about to set everything in motion. Because when the first page of Danny's journal leaked to the outside world, Rikers Island would never be able to hide again. When the first page of Danny Moore's journal appeared online, it didn't come from a reporter or an insider. It came from a prison contraband phone. The photo was grainy, just a torn notebook page lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb. But the handwriting was unmistakable. The words were chilling. "They think we're just inmates. But we're witnesses. And witnesses don't live long here." Within hours, the image spread across social media. Blogs picked it up. Activists demanded answers. The Department of Correction called it fake. But deep inside Rikers Island, everyone knew it wasn't. The handwriting was real. The fear behind it was real. And for the first time, the silence had cracked. Detective Lila Anderson saw the post on her phone at 5:43 a.m. She hadn't slept in 2 nights. The caption read, #RikersTruth. It had already reached 10,000 shares. Her phone buzzed again, an encrypted message from an unknown sender. "You're not done yet. They're moving the evidence. Building K. Today." Anderson's pulse raced. She looked out her window toward the East River. The morning fog had barely lifted. If they were moving evidence now, it meant someone inside had panicked. Inside Rosie's, chaos rippled through the dorms. The women had heard about the leak. Some cheered quietly. Others hid their faces, terrified of what would follow. Officer Colton, the special inspector, walked the corridors that morning with 2 men in suits. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Everyone could feel what his presence meant: retaliation. Tasha Green sat on her bunk, holding a folded photograph of her daughter, the only thing she had left from home. She hadn't seen the outside in 2 years. But now, she felt something strange, a spark of defiance. She'd seen too much. Danny's disappearance, Janine's silence, the night vans, all of it. And she wasn't about to let the truth die again. That afternoon, she found the same phone used to post the journal photo. The woman who had uploaded it, a quiet inmate named Rosa, had hidden it under a loose floor tile. Tasha held it in her hands, the tiny screen glowing like a lifeline. "If they come for me," Rosa whispered, "you make sure the world knows everything." Tasha nodded. "I will." Meanwhile, Anderson drove toward the Rikers Island bridge, flashing a borrowed DOC pass she'd lifted from a contact at headquarters. The guard barely looked up. Her name wasn't on the blacklist anymore, probably because the department thought she'd given up. But she hadn't. She parked behind an old utility shed and watched the service road leading to Building K. 3 black vans idled near the entrance. Men in plain clothes loaded crates marked medical disposal. Each one had a coded tag. Anderson zoomed in with her camera lens and froze. The same tags that had been on the missing evidence transfer, confidential crate weeks earlier. She started recording. Her hands trembled as the wind whipped through the open car window. Then, suddenly, someone knocked on the glass. It was Officer Janine Lowe. "Alive." "Get in," she said quickly. "You're about to see something they don't want anyone to see." Janine drove them to a fenced-off maintenance tunnel behind the condemned hospital building. She explained everything in fragments: how she'd gone into hiding after discovering Danny's journal, how she'd been smuggled out by a sympathetic nurse, and how the journal's copies had been scattered among inmates to ensure at least one version survived. "They think they buried it," she said, pulling a flashlight from her pocket. But Danny left a lot more than words. They pried open a corroded hatch leading into the tunnel. The air was thick, damp, and cold. Water dripped from overhead pipes. As they moved deeper, Anderson noticed markings on the wall, chalk lines, numbers, initials. DM214s. They followed the markings until they reached a small, bricked-off chamber. Inside it, under a tarp, were dozens of sealed evidence boxes, the missing crate among them. Anderson's flashlight beam reflected off metallic tags labeled with names and inmate numbers. She lifted one lid. Inside were stacks of paper, incident reports, complaint forms, and signed statements. But what made her blood run cold were the photos beneath them, official DOC identification cards for women who were never listed as released or transferred. Danny's name was one of them. And taped inside the crate was a small voice recorder. Janine clicked play. The static cleared, replaced by Danny's voice, faint but steady. "If you're hearing this, they didn't let me leave. Tell Lila Anderson I kept my promise. The walls have everything they need to speak, they just need someone to listen." Anderson closed her eyes, fighting the lump in her throat. The evidence was real, physical, undeniable. But before she could process it, the sound of footsteps echoed down the tunnel. Colton. He stepped into the light with 2 armed officers. "Detective Anderson," he said calmly. "You're trespassing on state property. Step away from the boxes." Anderson raised her hands. "You covered up an abuse ring. You erased women. How long did you think this would stay buried?" Colton smirked. "Long enough. You're not a cop anymore. No one will believe you." Janine moved closer to Anderson, whispering, "The recorder. Upload it now." Anderson slipped her phone out, opened the encrypted app, and hit send. A green check mark blinked on screen, "File uploading." Then the tunnel lights flickered. Colton's expression changed. He lunged forward. But it was too late. Outside, a phone buzzed in the newsroom of the New York Ledger. A new anonymous submission had just arrived, audio file attached. The subject line read, "Rikers Island, proof." Back inside, the power cut out. In total darkness, Anderson and Janine stumbled through the tunnel, chased by the echo of shouting voices. They burst through a side door, emerging into the cold night air of the abandoned yard. Sirens wailed in the distance, not inside the prison, but on the bridge. Someone had triggered the alert. Anderson turned to Janine, breathless. "Once that file goes public, they can't bury this." Janine nodded, tears streaking her face. "Danny did it. She really did it." They drove away from Rikers without looking back. The flashing lights of emergency vehicles painted the road behind them blue and red, as if the whole island were burning with the weight of its own secrets. By sunrise, the story had gone viral. The leaked audio aired on multiple platforms. News anchors called it the Rikers revelation. The Department of Correction denied it at first, until photos of the crates appeared online. Then came the resignations. Investigations. Protests. The Rose M. Singer Center was placed under federal review. Colton was suspended. Officer Bennett vanished. And among the chaos, someone spray-painted 4 words across the entrance of the women's unit in black letters. They were never silent. Months later, Lila Anderson sat in a small apartment overlooking the river. On her desk were copies of Danny's journal, the printed photos, and a newspaper headline that read, "Truth buried no more, Rikers Women's Unit under investigation." She turned on her recorder one last time. "Danny, if somehow you can hear this, your story didn't die in those walls." The world finally listened. She pressed stop. Outside, the wind howled against the window, carrying the faint echo of the island across the water. And for the first time in years, Rikers Island felt less like a secret and more like a confession. If you think the story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.